Hi, everyone, and welcome to Conversations. My name is Emily, and I'll be hosting this panel along with Giulia. And today we're going to be talking about multimodal design and interactions. So I'm very, very excited about this topic. And it's something that's so complex that I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand the best way to design for it and all the intricacies of it. So I'm really looking forward to diving into it. So let's get started with a round of introductions. Sara, do you want to go first?
Sure, thank you, Emily. Well, I am a lead analyst at NNTT Data at the moment. I've been working in the conversational field for over 4 years, 5 now, and I have a background in arts. So when I joined the world of conversations, everything the dialogue I was hearing a lot, it was like conversations first and voice first, and I was like, well, uh, I think it's more interesting when it's integrated with other modalities and ways of interaction. No, it's more complete and more accessible, and I think this is what brings me here with you today, and I'm very grateful for joining all of this great cohort. So just give
Thanks for being
access
here.
to another one.
Kristie, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kristie Kotch, a senior conversation designer at Amazon. I've been a conversation designer for about 14 years now, I think. I am one of the very strange ducks in conversation design who actually started my career in conversation design. It's all I've ever done professionally. Um, Most recently, I've been designing for Amazon's Rufus, which is the Gen AI shopping assistant in the mobile app. Really excited to be here.
Awesome. Olivia?
Hi everyone, my name is Olivia Marrese. Thank you again, Emily and Giulia. You always host the best conversations, so super excited to be here. I am a conversational architect at 66 Degrees, and my background comes from the linguistics research side. I received a PhD in linguistics from the University of Colorado Boulder. So coming at what does multimodality mean from the human interaction perspective, and then of course for us, what does that mean when we're doing talking with machines? So excited to be here.
Ilana?
Hi, I'm Ilana Meir. Thank you for having me. I have about a decade of experience as a conversation designer, starting with helping healthcare teams scale their outreach to patients and then moving on to Meta Reality Labs, where I worked in AR, VR, helping launch the Ray-Ban Meta smart glasses, helping define the AR interaction model, which had a lot of multimodality in it, and then working to improve the natural language generation LLMs as well. Um, yeah, thank you for having me. I'm a little bit under the weather. You can tell by my voice. So let me know if you can't hear me.
Sorry. Yeah. Well, thank you all for being here. So I guess we'll just get started with the first question. And I'm curious how you would describe multimodal design to someone that has no idea what it is. I feel like there's so many different ways to kind of look at multimodality. So I'm curious to hear, what you all think. Olivia, do you want to start?
Yeah, so for someone who's not in this space and asks what does multimodal mean, I'd say, well, think of your everyday life. You probably talk a lot, but maybe you talk face to face, you talk on the phone, maybe you talk on Zoom, but you can also have conversations and do that talking via text. And is that via SMS? Is that via Slack? And then think about all of those physical attributes I just talked about, the phones and the computer and the web applications. So it's multiple layers to what platform you're talking on and how you're doing that interaction. So it's all of those combined. And especially you'll see the gesture. So it's things like gestures, and it's the clothes that we wear. And Ilana already brought up wearables and headsets. And is it using headphones? So it is, I think of it really as bringing to bear everything you can to an interaction.
Kristie, you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, that was a great answer. I think the only thing I like to keep it really simplistic, I think it's any kind of design where customers can provide inputs or we give responses that incorporate more than one sense or more than one modality, for lack of a better word. And really, it's a step towards, you know, approaching more truly natural interactions, because they just take into consideration more of what the world has to offer.
Sarah, anything to add?
I really liked both answers, and maybe I want to bring into the stage what Giulia also posted for announcing the panel, and is that the world is inherently multimodal. No, this is how we learn, interact, and create knowledge and from the world through our senses. No, we receive the input, and then we also express output in different ways. No. And what I really like to say when we are especially talking in the realm of conversational AI is that language usually it's 7% of the meaning of what we communicate. Everything else goes also to how we express ourselves, the tonalities and the gesture, no, the para. I don't know how to say it in English. In Spanish, it's paralenguaje. It's like
Paralanguage, like the nonverbal
paralanguage.
communication.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Everything else comes from those other modes, no, or those other aspects of interacting. And when we are speaking of human computer interaction, it's how what are the softwares and the hardware available to us in order to have this communication back and forth with the machine.
Ilana, anything? Oh, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just going to say that if Ilana wanted to add anything else.
Yeah, so I think what Olivia was touching on is two different definitions of multimodal. So it's also been a little bit, I don't know, not clear in my career. So I have a master's in marketing, and the way that multimodal was used there is, oh, you have an experience for the TV or for a show that somebody's watching, and then you also have the mobile experience, and then you have outside advertising too. How do those all work in conjunction with each other? And then we also have the multimodal, which is, do we use touch and voice and haptics together? What sorts of inputs are we using together? But I think all of this touches on both what Sara and Kristie were saying, which is that this is part of one kind of life experience, how people move through time throughout their day. So like they're watching TV and on their phone, how do those things work together? Or they've entered your experience. How are they going to be able to use their senses that are always engaged as a human being to interact with the thing? And how are you going to enable that?
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you also, Ilana, for kind of putting it all together. I was curious then, as we get into like multimodal design, and like what is your process? Like where do you even start designing from? Maybe.
I think one thought that I just wanted to clarify too is that occurred to me as we've been thinking about this is we've been throwing around like talk and interaction. And for me, a really big distinction is between talk and interaction being how we do communication, how we produce social action, how we access the world and access people around ourselves. And talk is one element of that. And that talk can come across, like Ilana made a really nice distinction, on a lot of different platforms, or like I work in a lot of e-commerce situations, so an omni-channel kind of experience. But to your question, Giulia, about how do we tackle this, I think for me, at least, starting from an interaction perspective, you're human in the world and we're trying to get things done. And we have all these things available to ourselves. Sometimes the design perspective can come from a voice first or a speech first, which can be a really effective choice, but it is a choice too. It doesn't necessarily have to be the baseline for an interaction.
Yeah, I think that the kind of saying, where do you start? I think the first thing I typically do is figure out, well, which modalities are appropriate here. Like, I think as multimodal designers, it's often easy to say, well, of course, we'll have voice and touch or whatever happens to be in the case. But I think really stepping back and understanding, well, what is the customer use case? Where are they going to be in the world when this happens? What are they going to have at their disposal, and understand what's going to serve them best and where they are, and understanding the strengths of each modalities that might come to the table, and kind of understanding that up front and taking the time to do that up front and not just take multimodality for granted, I think is an important first step to take.
Ilana, did you have anything? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think in conjunction with that, as part of the overall discovery phase, looking at what modalities you have to work with. So working in a 0 to 1 space, there was a lot that we could play around with, but oftentimes different companies only have certain modalities that they can use as input. Even if that's the case, I would still look into exactly what Kristie said, which is starting with your user research, and seeing what may be lost in the interaction, and seeing if you can make up for it if you are missing one of the key modalities that people are used to working with.
Sara, anything to add?
I guess a bit.
Oh. There you go.
Maybe no, I think it's just to be how do you say a bit more repetitive. At the end, everything is tied up also to the hardware that you are bounded to. You have to start with the discovery phase also with what are the business needs, what are the use cases. Are you working with content centers? It's more like an innovation product. Where are you coming from? And first, like, also, of course, everything is tied up to the design thinking methodology and user research and user experience methodology. But it's very tied with what is the hardware that I'm going to use. No, so it's not the same if I have an Amazon Echo, that if I'm designing for automotive, that if I am designing for these new smartphones or smart tools like the AI Pin or the Rabbit R1 now. So yeah, hardware for me, it's a key cornerstone, besides also user research.
So just out of curiosity, how is user research different for multimodal experiences? And also usability testing too. I know those are, yeah, kind of similar, but curious how you approach that with so many different modalities to think of, and especially if you're using, things where you're on the go, or if you're transitioning. Yeah. Ilana, do you want to start?
Sara, do you want to go? I just saw you on mute.
I get it's all good, all fine with me. How do you? I think it's also a matter of a mentality approach. Because you have to think. I think about it like designing for a multimodal approach as an orchestrator. No, you have to have different input options or output options that have to work somehow all at the same time. And basically, it's like you're just adding layers of things. it helps dividing things on a very detailed level of the steps. It's like, for example, I'm working for a TV, no, and I'm designing a voice agent for navigating across TV. I need to think not only that the user has to be able to give his input, but how I'm also communicating to the user that his input is being received. I have a big screen available to him or to her, to them. And maybe I want to bring a sound cue, and you also are thinking of the different modalities to provide accessibility to people that if they don't hear properly, they need to see them. They are also seeing the captions, no, being recorded from their input. That that the screen is showing that it's listening, that the screen is showing that it's processing the request, and then that is showing that it has processed or that is speaking back. No, so it's like somehow this loop that you need to think of. This is one example that comes to mind. Regarding testing, obviously, everything that incorporates more than one modality, complexity increases. And not to speak if you are already also including some sort of model that also recognizes images, not only speech input, no? So coordinating all of that increases latency, and well, I think the industry and the technology can improve a lot, and there are a lot of things that will be improved. But I'm not quite sure what else I can bring to the table. But yeah.
Kristie, did you have?
Yeah, I was just going to say that something that has been really clear to me working on multimodal things is that it's even more important for UX research to test in the environment that customers are going to actually be using. You know, if you're testing an experience on an Echo Show and it's, you know, on a desk in front of a customer in a lab environment, well, of course, customers are going to try to tap it. That's very different than if you're, you know, in a busy kitchen with dirty hands and your Echo Show is actually on a, you know, bookshelf over in the corner. So I think that it, you know, it's always important to test in as realistic situations as possible. But I think for multimodality, it is really critical.
I was going to echo the exact same thing. I was working on a project for automatic food ordering technology for a fast food company. And again, announcing your order in a quiet lab environment is so different than going in a car, screaming out the window. There's kids in the back seat. There's construction, you know, overwhelming you. So being, you know, when you're in the design phase, putting yourself in your user's shoes as much as possible. Who are they? What are they trying to accomplish? Where are they doing it? Because it's probably not at a desk like you are when you're designing. Getting yourself out of the house can help a lot. Just on a walk, just getting some more sensory input into your own experience and getting out of that desk and thinking through, okay, well, what would this actually look like in real life? And then, I mean, I feel like I can never overhype how much it's needed to actually see how people use it. Because we've all had those experiences where someone says or does something that you didn't even consider, because we're all limited by our own blind spots, and particularly the more modes you are dealing with, it sort of exponentially increases the number of different pathways that folks can take. So I think not being afraid to do that testing, because if you're smart and strategic about it, it's only going to add to the experience, or at least tell you and be able to give you some backup in terms of why you're making a choice to not do something. Because we will not be designing for every mode in every environment, for every language, for every user. We just aren't. So you have to also know why you're making a choice to not include something, and make sure you have good standing for why you're doing that.
I want to add another point, yes, to everything that everybody said. And also, I think you have to think about where you are in the process for a particular product. So sometimes when you're in user research, it'll be self-evident that you need another modality. So if people are used to using voice to interact with their screen, but they can't in a certain situation, and then you set them up to do a particular task, and then you see, oh, they go to use their voice like they would in every other way, but they can't use it. Then that's self-evident. Oh, hey, let's add some voice here. But you could be looking to add another input to a situation where users are very used to using another type of input. So to illustrate it, if users are used to traversing a menu with touch or with clicking, and you want to introduce voice, they might be scared of the voice button and not know what to do with it, even though it's going to be most expedient and what they'd ultimately prefer in the future. And so there, what the user research will expose is that it's not necessarily a multimodality problem. You already know that what you're introducing is more expedient, but the question becomes, how can you increase adoption and how can you make it more comfortable for people to feel that they can use multimodal interactions in that situation?
So how do you approach a situation where you might not have access to a modality that users are like expect to be able to have? Have you run into that scenario or situation at all?
Yes. Sorry, I didn't know if you were fielding it to
Oh
that.
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have run into that before. So having consistency across the system, like I mentioned, is really important for just a good user interaction and having trust, and building also a good rapport with users. And I've been in a situation where the resourcing was such that the voice experience could go ahead of the touch experience because they were staffed by different engineering teams. And in that situation, it's tricky because then you have to advocate for why is this really important and why is this important for this other team to put ahead of everything else. And it's a case that has to be made. So that's one of those situations.
Yeah, that's tough. Anyone else?
I would just say it's a place where I think you really have to step back and think, can the feature launch incrementally? And sometimes the answer is yes, but sometimes it is a broken experience without the other modalities. So I think it's hard to answer like in broad strokes, but I think really assessing like, is this a place where we even can or should go forward until the other modalities are available?
Yeah, absolutely.
And are there any other challenges that come to mind that you've encountered specific to multimodal designing?
Well, I think just building off of what I just said, I think that customers, if it's something that customers are going to be using habitually, like in my case, an Amazon Echo, like it's very hard to teach customers that additional modalities are available once they have already built that habit. So I think kind of if it's okay that the other modality is just not going to be part of their habit, maybe that works. But I think understanding like how important is it going to be if they've built that habit, and you're going to have an uphill battle introducing the other modality potentially than when that is introduced later on.
I think we in our design can help kind of coax or coach folks if there are other modalities available that might be more useful to them. So I'm thinking of a case in which, okay, let's say you're calling in and you have a question about something that involves some sort of numeral, your PNR number for an airline flight lookup, your order number, something that might be a little bit hard to get across via voice if you're trying to read off a number. You can offer to the person, if you didn't get it the first time, say, hey, this might be a little bit easier if you can type it out, want to switch to text, and then give them that offer to do so. So thinking of cases in which you don't necessarily have to force them one way or another, because as you said, folks get real habituated in the way that they want to do things, but making that offer available to your user to hopefully improve the experience and explain to them. I think users rightfully get very frustrated if they feel like they're just being punted across channels or punted across experiences without understanding why. So giving that brief explanation, on the IVR side, hey, I'm having a hard time hearing you. If we did pick something up, we can put that in a message and say, want to switch to text? Can I, want to call back at this other time or something like that to explain why you're providing that option in service of the user.
Absolutely, and I think we also have to consider that the system models that each person has, no? So enabling another modality, it's because you are providing an easier way or an easier tool to the user to interact with you and communicate with you, and they are going to use it if it helps them. If not, that will not. No, but a lot of the times, especially when it comes with conversational interactions, there is a lot of effort required for education and guidance, because people are used to also visuals, and to have a first quick look on the architecture of a system. And now with voice and things and conversations, things become more hidden, no? And this way, maybe more linear, like you're supposed to give the right next step, so you simplify things for the users, but it does require a lot of thinking. How can I guide you best so you can take the best out of this interaction or technology?
Ilana, anything else to add? I was curious about how you approach documentation for multimodal experiences. And I know you may not be able to give details here, but it's definitely different than more traditional experiences. So I was wondering if you have any tips or advice on kind of how to communicate the designs to engineers and developers, and also to stakeholders, so they understand like how the interaction works.
I think it's good to include a prototype or a video, just so that everybody knows what you're aiming for before they dive into the very specifics. I also like to have a handoff meeting, so that people can ask questions and just go over an overview of how everything is put together, so that everybody is starting on the same page. But a prototype or video can be very powerful.
I've seen people try to document multimodal experiences with different documents for the different modalities. And sometimes that's because, it's different engineering teams working on the different modalities, like Ilana was talking about. In my experience, that is almost never the best way to go about it. So I think that my 2 cents is just, if it's a multimodal experience, it has to be a multimodal documentation, showing how both or all modalities are going to live together, at least for stakeholder reviews and designs. And then if you need to split it out for engineering, that can be handled kind of after the fact. But I think it's a big mistake to document separately.
Anyone else?
Just can say just 100% video is the best. Yeah.
Olivia, anything?
Second and third videos for the most part, especially trying to get out of, we have 92 documents and they live here and there, but just make a video of what it's supposed to do.
So does does multimodal design require any additional specialized knowledge, or did you have to learn anything else that you wouldn't typically have to learn for other experiences?
I'd say, yes, specialized knowledge in having studied it, having lived it, having practiced it. If folks feel like they want to learn more about different modes and how to design for different modes, I'd say just start noticing things in your everyday life. Particularly, I did one back in my research days, a big research project in a retail environment, looking at how do people bring things to the counter and where do they place them and how do they talk about the product and how do they interact with the people working at the store. And then that obviously got spun off into a whole different thing on the research side of stuff, but just pay attention to things, pay attention to what you touch and what other people gravitate towards. And, data is always the most important foundation, I think, in understanding these things. And luckily, for something like multimodal interaction, we have a wealth of data available to us in our everyday. So put on sort of your researcher, anthropologist hat and notice things and jot down your observations and get curious about why we're doing certain things or how it could maybe be done better. And I think that is, for lack of other maybe specialized trainings, and obviously there's all kinds of stuff like that, but that's just a really good way that anyone who wants to explore this area more can start to notice and start to observe.
Anyone else?
Just real quick, I had spent the first, 9.5 years of my career as a pure VUI designer. And then I think when I started to work on more multimodal designs, I think I really had to stretch my skills into more UX design more broadly. So I think anything that as conversation designers we can do to kind of learn more about that. And, hopefully we're also pairing with UX designers who have that skill set. But even in cases we don't, I think designing for multimodal has pushed me to consider myself more of an interaction designer whose specialty happens to be conversation versus more strictly, a conversation designer.
100%, Kristie, and I don't think one person needs to know it all. No, at the end, these projects are handled with a group of people. Usually, you have someone that is more experienced in UI designing, and someone that it's very sensitive with conversation, and it's always also a collaboration of a team that knows what are the technical limitations and what are the elements that I need to add to make this experience best. And Olivia, I totally agree with you. Like empathy, it's a huge part of the skills everybody needs to have in the team, because if you don't know your user, then it's difficult to be able to design for him.
I also agree. I think that it's about opening your senses, and I think that it's available to everybody. And I don't think that it has to be an official study, and it doesn't have to be an arduous journey or anything like that. You can just pick something that you're interested in and start watching YouTube videos on other people explaining things about decisions that they made. So in terms of interaction design, Olivia was talking about people putting down things there versus there. In a physical space, you can look up coffee shop design. And what it's going to do is it's going to help you build a vocabulary of what's happening. And then you'll start to notice it more when you're out in the world, when you are at a coffee shop, or just look up, I don't know, like the top 10 best practices of UX design or something like that. And that'll start again to build your vocabulary, start to build your sensibility for what is good and what usually doesn't work and why. And similarly to Kristie, now having worked with a team of designers from all different backgrounds for different modalities, I also consider myself an interaction designer because I have made a concerted effort to develop those sensibilities over time in this way.
Thank you also for the practical tips. I haven't considered it before, but yeah, I kind of can't wait to do it now to like just get tips also like from coffee shop design and stuff like that. I saw there's also an audience question that I wanted to plug. So, what unique challenges does each modality present, and how do you solve for them?
Can we start
There's
with
some-
what modalities they want to address or we want to address?
I would say maybe let's pick one or two that you have worked with the most, or for now, unless we can get another answer. But yeah, maybe like chat, voice, focusing on kind of the more typical ones.
I have an example for a fun voice one that occurred to me as we've been having this conversation. I feel like we could do an entire panel on just this question too. So one example that occurred to me as we've been chatting is when I talked about doing the automatic fast food ordering, a challenge that the team, I had been kind of brought out in more of a consulting capacity, and a challenge that the team had encountered is with audio and with voice, you can have things interrupting, there's traffic in the background, there's multiple voices, and the team was finding it very hard when going to close the order, saying something like, it was really hard to capture the yes and no, if there's more to order or if they're all done. When people are saying no, that they're all done, it was very hard to capture that, and things were breaking down. There wasn't a good way to close. So one thing, basically, what you want to do is think about, well, what's the problem? Okay, we can't capture the no. There's not enough audio input for the system to understand. So we need more audio input for the close. So how do we invert that and think about how do we get a longer response from the user? We can think about kind of a classic of conversation and voice design is your question. And if you ask a polar question, like, is that all? That prefers a yes/no response, you're going to get a no response, and that was short and hard for the system to pick up. So if you design instead a question like, what else can I get you? And then the user says, nothing, I'm good, thanks. That's not really nice long input that then closed, and the system was able to pick up because it gave us a lot more audio to work with. If we didn't get the very beginning, we could capture the rest of it and we see that they wanted to close. So I think the most important thing to do when we're thinking about what are the challenges is, again, look at the data. That's, my team teases me that I'm always harping on, look at the data and identifying the problem. And sometimes it is working backwards a little bit. If you've identified the problem, think steps back about what you can do in a prior step to solve that problem. I mean, that's the obvious answer, right? Is to solve it. But for voice, particularly when things are being interrupted, when you have long pauses, think about the why behind it.
Does anyone else have any examples, be it with voice or other modalities? Sarah?
Examples regarding what Olivia said, or just
like on
other
challenges that you faced and how you thought about solving them?
I think another challenge for me would be dealing with user expectations. Also, when dealing with this more considered modern interactions or modalities, usually people. I mean, now with LLMs, sort of we are catching up with what science fiction has taught us that we can do with computers. But definitely the differences across platforms, providers, that you can do different things with different providers. Or, I mean, now they're sort of getting into a standard, but people would expect that what they know from one place, it will work from another. And that usually, or that sometimes it's not the way it works. No, so I go back to the point of guiding and educating the user. It's really important in that sense, like what they cannot do and what they can do. Visually is usually easier to guide users because we've been for a while already, many years, dealing with interactions in a visual way. But when you incorporate more open queries or chat or voice options, the architecture is invisible then, and that is something quite challenging to deal with.
I'll go back to an example that I used earlier, which is traversal. So voice is really good at traversing. Touch is not that good at traversing because it just takes a while. The advantages of touch are that it's deterministic. You press a button and you know exactly somebody pressed that button, whereas there are so many other things to consider with voice and language, like is a request unspecified. So the command like play what are you getting at, and you have to design for that. It can be underspecified, so play that song by Taylor Swift. It's like which song, how are we going to design for that, or are we going to prompt for something else? If you're talking about speech in particular, spoken language, there can be disfluencies. And I just used one. I just said there are disfluencies, and there are different ways that people speak. So that can be whether it's accented language, or it can be non-native, whatever language you're speaker that does a translation differently, like open the light versus turn on the light is a common one. And so those are some challenges of working with language and touch.
I think the ephemeral nature of voice is something that I always come back to also. I think if you have a more screen-based or touch-based interaction, you can often, scroll back through your chat to see what the bot said earlier, what that previous information was. And I think in voice, it's once it's said, it's said. And in, a well-designed app, you can certainly ask to repeat it. But I think that it becomes even more critical to minimize the cognitive load, speak in short sentences, have wayfinding elements so that the customer can kind of find their way back, whether that's ear cons or, landmarking phrases and things like that, I think are even more important in that modality. And then I would also just say that, kind of diverging a little bit from the exact question, but I do think that there are definite unique challenges when you are combining the different modalities as well, that, don't exist in any on their own. For an Amazon Echo, you have to consider, like, okay, Alexa is saying something, but what's on the screen? The customer is going to have that in mind as well. And how does the cognitive load of multiple modalities happening at the same time impact the customer? So I think there's definitely a compounding effect of the challenges when you combine multiple modalities as well.
So I was actually jumping off of that. I think we mentioned it, kind of brushed a little bit on it, but how do you account for like conversation repair, error handling, and all of that with multimodal experiences? Yeah, curious to hear what your approaches are. Olivia?
Here's a good example that you brought up, because if you say something and your user says, what? If it was done on voice, research shows us that is likely because there was an issue in hearing versus understanding. That's kind of the first baseline, is that they simply didn't hear what you said. So you might want to, in your design, put a full repeat of what the prior turn was. Whereas Kristie brought the good point, if you're in a text-based bot and someone says, what? They can still read the exact same thing that you just said. So it's unlikely that they would need a full repeat. And that would actually be a really poor user experience to get the exact same thing said back to you, because it's right there and you just said what to it. Like, you're making it known as a user, you don't know what's happening. So it's important to, between modes and within modes, think about what is the key issue? Again, taking that one step backwards. And in voice, we know from conversation analytic research that if someone initiates repair in an open-ended way, it's probably because they didn't hear it, so we can do that full repeat. If they say it again, then we know it probably was an issue of understanding. So we say it in different language or with different words, or maybe say, hey, it seems like we're having a hard time hearing each other. Want to switch to text? Versus if you're already on a text-based conversation, then we probably want to jump straight to a definition of something. We might then at that point want to prompt, are you having trouble with X, Y, or Z shown in a chip card? That might be some frequently asked questions, but really important to think about the why behind what's happening for each mode.
Anyone else?
I want to address one specific type of error, which is no input. So the user opens a conversation and then says nothing. And then what do you do next? And using multimodalities can be really powerful here. So you can use an ear con to let the user know that you're still listening. You could say, if it was appropriate, can I help you? Something like that. Or if you have a screen, you could prompt somebody, with like a pulsing icon or whatever is in your design language, to let them know, hey, I'm still listening. I'm here for you. I'm ready if you're there. One thing again to consider is the context, though. So if people are out and about with their smart glasses, it's unlikely that they're going to hear an ear con, a little noise to let them know that, oh, you're still listening. So in that case, speech might be better, even though it's more intrusive. And so if you think about the trade-offs there, when you think about conversation repair, how likely is it that somebody engaged you for real or in error, and then getting back on track?
Kristie, Sara, anything?
I was just going to add that I think that when you're working in multimodality, I think there's a really great extra tool for error repair, because like Olivia was touching on it, if voice is really struggling, you can pivot to the other modality. So I think that's a great kind of tool at our disposal. I think you just have to do it very thoughtfully, so that you're still being respectful of the modality that the customer chose to interact with initially.
I want to add very quickly, you can imagine if somebody is typing in a chat box and then it starts speaking at them all of a sudden. That'd be really terrible.
Have you encountered this, Elena?
No, but I've stopped it from happening. So thinking about having a design principle that if the user hasn't initiated a voice conversation, a voice interaction, that the system doesn't then initiate. But if you're already in a voice interaction, then voice can be at your disposal to use.
Yeah, there's a definite hierarchy, I think, when you're talking about modalities. Like if they're in voice and struggling, it's okay to back off to touch. I think if they're in touch, it's really not okay to back off to voice. I'll never say never, but in all the examples I can think of. So I think kind of knowing the kind of hierarchy of the modalities there when planning that out.
Absolutely. Sara, did you have anything?
No, I think also with the last comment from Kristie, it was perfect, because you actually have more tools to inform and let the user know what's going on, or to provide with a fallback, instead of showing a 404 error where you don't know where to act or go next.
Right. So I'm also curious how you measure success for these types of experiences. And I guess, yeah, how you even start to approach like what does success mean and through the different modalities and how you measure them together.
It goes back to use cases. So you're not designing modalities for the sake of modalities. You are including modalities for the sake of a use case. So at the end of the day, was my use case successful? Did the user accomplish what they were looking for? They needed, no? So at the end of the day, you include the modality to offer other options to the user to interact. So you're supporting them for whatever needs they have at the moment, and then will be in case by case.
Anyone else? Oh, go ahead, Ilana.
I think that it does have to do a lot with what your business needs are, and it's likely metrics that you already have in place. So as Sara was saying, you don't just have a modality to throw it in there. It's what is the best user experience, and why did you design this experience in the first place? And is it meeting your expectations in terms of the number of people that you have using it and that are retained, growth over time? Is it getting people to what they need, to those user goals? I think that you can use all the traditional metrics that you would normally look at for your experiences that you would for multimodal design.
Mm-hmm. Olivia?
Second, third, everything that, again, it comes down to, did you have a strong use case defined at the beginning? What is the action that your user is trying to accomplish? And then did they accomplish it at a high level? But then there's so much more you can go into that, it is really important insights to look at, okay, well, which platform are users choosing? Do they keep coming to voice for some reason? Are they all coming via text? If it's text, are they all on web chat because they need another browser open to pull open their email to get their order number at the exact same time? That's easier to do on a web browser, versus a phone. So I think the great and the hard answer is everything you would normally do and then some.
And then also really look at where customers are switching modalities potentially, because that can give you a really great extra data point of where maybe something is falling short in one of the modalities designs today.
Absolutely.
It's all advantages. Switch to multimodal.
Yeah. Okay, I know we're running up on time, so I'm just going to do one last question, and then we can finish out. And I know there's some other questions in the chat, but I'll tag you all if that's okay, and we'll get them answered after. So when designing for multimodality, particularly when supporting both voice and chat, where should we begin? Should we start with chat and then transition to voice, or vice versa? Also, what are the overlapping patterns or principles that remain consistent across all modalities? Maybe we'll just get to the first question for now, and then we can we can answer via chat later. Or do you design for both together? Anyone want to take this one? Oh, Sara?
I'm just gonna use an example I like. Is like our actions are linear. You can enable both modalities, but at the end of the day, you will be using or voice or chat, one thing at a time. No, so when we are sending messages, when we're using WhatsApp with our colleagues, and we can switch from sending voice notes to sending a chat and back and forth. You have both possibilities enabled, but you're not using them both at the same time, because otherwise you will create confusion to the system. So it's about enabling the modalities, but definitely not using them all at the same time. You're just using one.
Anyone else?
I think when you're trying to figure out, okay, pen to paper, how do I actually start designing the system? I would start with the agnostic, what is the action that's happening? Do a greeting, a request for information, receive information, confirmation. If you didn't get the information, what's going to happen after there? Like, think in terms of action categories, and then think, okay, when I do a request for confirmation, what's this sound like on voice? What does this look like on text? That's the secondary layer, but starting with what is the action, because that's what's tied to your use case and to what your user is trying to accomplish. So starting at the high level, the action category of what's happening, and then later on, you can see what does it look like, sound like, feel like, taste like, question mark, maybe in the future in each of those modalities.
I totally agree with that. I would just say it's also important. Like, I think that there's, the dream that we can just design once and then deploy it out across modalities. But I think it's really important to consider that there are different rules at play for the different modalities. So I don't have a strong stance on start with chat, start with voice. I think I agree with Olivia about starting with actions, but also make sure that you're not discounting what makes each modality unique. And, an implicit confirmation might be really important for voice, but not as important for chat, where the customer can see what they just said. So also paying attention to that too.
That's so key. I know, concluding thoughts, not assuming that because it worked on one modality, you can just transplant it to the next. Because actually, I think we probably all agree, not a chance that's gonna work.
I think that it's important to think through what is the ingress point for your customers. So if you have a website, they're starting at your website. Are they giving your customer service line a call, or are they starting with your chatbot? And then also think through workflows, resources. So like, do you prefer that the chatbot handle things first? And then how much staff do you have to handle maybe the specialized scenarios that really need custom support? Besides that, thinking across your entire ecosystem and the context of how your users are coming to you, I'd also just look into the second part of your question was about the best practices for chat and for voice, and there are tons of best practices. For chat, you're designing for scannability. So how does this look, and can I get the information quickly by gazing? And as somebody mentioned, I think it was Kristie talking about the ephemeral nature of voice. With chat, you can go back and forth and review, whereas with voice, you can't. And so while you're designing for scannability for chat, you're designing for listenability and all the listenability principles I believe Sara mentioned at the top, to make that experience as easy as possible. So just look into those two things.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know we're pretty much at time. So does anyone have any last thoughts, tips, advice for people designing these experiences? I know we've covered a lot. I have a million other questions, but we could talk about this for ages. But okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining. This was super informative and insightful. So yeah, I really appreciate you all being here. And we have one more panel coming up in 2 weeks for the end of the year. And yeah, stay tuned for more. So thank you so
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very much to you too.
Bye.
Have a good one.